Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And it's another of our All Things Africa edition. We continue to explore the history and current affairs of each African country. And we continue to explore Southern Africa, the Southern African region. And this episode, we look at the history and current affairs of Malawi. Well, one moment. Yes, of Malawi. And who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our historical guide, our tour guide, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Abayomi is a longtime historian, journalist, Pan Africanist, leftist, and activist. And just before we begin, a reminder to our audience, as always, please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists, help us overcome the far right algorithms and dominant monopoly, Western corporate state media, and pseudo-leftist websites have in the social media world by sharing our content across social media and email. And please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form of donation, then get in touch with me at yurismouter@gmail.com. And sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One. So again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely. Our only way of overcoming colonial, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, racist media. And on to the topic at hand. So Abayomi, as always, actually, hold up. It might. Okay, sorry about that. I was completely reading the wrong thing. I was on my Zambia thing. Now I'm on now I'm on my now I'm on
That was last week, but
Malawi.
this is Zambia is heavily connected with Malawi, and we'll see later on.
Anywho, I am on the Malawi page now. Jeez, okay, crazy me. Okay, so Abayomi, as always, tell us what was Malawi like before British colonialism? How did it become a British colony? And what were the conditions, human rights of the African people under Anglo-colonialism in Malawi?
Well, yes, Malawi as well, like most other regions we've discussed over the last several months, has a long history, a history that goes back, it is estimated some 2.3 or 2.5 million years. And now they consider this to be prehistory. And as I've said before, I have a problem with that designation, prehistory. As long as you have human beings, you have human settlements, you're going to have societies, and they're going to make history. But
Exactly.
anyway, the human settlements have been dated back to 2.3 to 2.5 million years. Other human settlements around Lake Malawi go back 50 to 60,000 years ago. They have human remains that have been found also around Lake Malawi that date back some 8,000 years before the Christian era. And of course, they have rock paintings that depict people who are quite similar to people, in fact, from the Horn of Africa and other areas. So it's a very, very interesting history to look at. And they, of course, have in 1500 BC, they were found remnants and rock paintings of the so-called San people who have been labeled as the Bushmen.
Yes.
And also, there have been other human remains and human evidence of human settlements around various areas in the Long Way, and also in other parts of Malawi, from the south all the way to the north. And the mythology of the people from that area indicate that the original people were dwarfs, meaning that they were probably San or the Batwa, as they are called in Central Africa, in the rainforest. Yes. Now we have to understand that these divisions were drawn by the European imperialist countries.
Yeah.
So there's strong connections between the history of Malawi and Mozambique, as well as Tanganyika, which later became Tanzania, as well as Zambia, both southern and northern Zambia as well. So as we said, these borders were drawn by the Europeans based upon their own interests. And that is a very, very important point to realize and looking at the history of Malawi. There were people who were involved in iron smelting and the development of iron tools. Also, there were agricultural communities as well as migratory communities as well. Now, between the 13th and the 15th century, a lot of these earlier groups, including the San or the so-called Batwa and other groups, began to merge and intermarry and develop somewhat of distinct phenotypes in the area. You had the Amaravi people who founded an empire in the late 15th century. Now, it's said that the Amaravi served as the basis for the name of modern day Malawi, which was instituted during the liberation movements and independence struggles that took place during the 1950s and 1960s. You also had people who came into the area from areas as far away as the Republic of Congo, Brazzaville.
Yeah.
Later, people came in from areas around South Africa during the Mfukani, which was a large-scale displacement of various African groups that was spawned by the intervention of the British, the Boers, as well as the internecine conflicts that took place among various groups throughout Southern Africa, extending all the way to East Africa as well. So that gives you a somewhat general idea of the history of the country, but they did have highly developed civilizations that were created and extended all the way up into at least the 15th and 16th centuries. And even beyond that, there was also the intervention of Islam and the Yao people in northern Malawi converted many centuries ago to Islam as a religion.
Yeah.
And they also had connections with the Swahili people along the East African coast, and they extend as well over to some of the islands off the East African coast, for example, Zanzibar and others. And also the Arabs who were involved in trade, both ivory trade as well as the enslavement of Africans as well. So yes, these are some of the antecedents to the modern period in Malawi.
And talk to us about how it became a British colony and what were the conditions, the human rights situation that Malawans had to fare under Anglo colonialism.
Well, initially the Portuguese came in and they wanted to set up trading forts. Soon they went into conflict with the existing people who were there, particularly the Yao people, as well as the Swahili people, over trade and commerce. Eventually, the British came in, and they, of course, by the late part of the 19th century, prompted by people such as David Livingstone, the explorer, who directed the British towards various areas of the country. This was around 1859, and Livingstone directed them to the Yao people. The Yao were Muslims. Then there was Charles Mackenzie, who was a Scottish mercenary who came in to try to set up the Anglican and the Scottish. Later, the Free Church of Scotland was also established there. So yes, the missionaries came in. They opened up the way for the British commerce. I mentioned the Church of Scotland was established, and there was also the areas around Lake Malawi where they had set up business enterprises and missionary outlets as well. They set up a company called the African Great Lakes Company. And this is very, very important because these were the commercial outlets that actually led to the colonization of Malawi. And you had Lake Nyasa, there was Lake Malawi, and these names, of course, have been resurrected after the 1950s and 1960s as independence outposts, and also representative of the resistance that the people in that area engaged in against people who were coming in from outside, Africans, and later against the Portuguese, and then, of course, the British. So, yes, it was a long, long history. And Livingston, the Central Africa Company of 1877 was established. That was the first company that was established. And then out of that came the African Great Lakes Company. So these are commercial enterprises that were set up. Later, you had the Catholic White Fathers who came in as missionaries to try to recruit for the Catholic Church. So you had the Anglican Church, the Church of Scotland, as well as the Catholic Church. They were all vying for some type of to build congregations and to also facilitate trade with the indigenous African people in that area. So that is what happened. And of course, the situation was very bad, heavily exploitative. People were forced to do labor on behalf of the British. And as a result of that, you had various rebellions that erupted in the area of Malawi, which was known as Malawi. They established what was known as the Federation of the Nyasaland Protectorate was set up initially, and then later you had the Federation of the Rhodesias and Nyasaland. Nyasaland was the name the country had under the British colonial regime that took place. So yes, it was a very intense situation. A lot of the racism that existed in the Rhodesias, Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia, also existed in Nyasaland. And this, of course, led to revolts, particularly after the commencement of World War I.
Interesting. And talk a bit more about the great Anglo-white demon that is Cecil Rhodes when it comes to Malawi.
Yeah, well, the Northern and Southern Rhodesia and Nyasaland were part of a federation that was established. So yes, they had a serious problem with racism, with the suppression of the African people and their rights. And of course, by 1915, there was a revolt that took place led by a man named John Chilembwe. Now, Chilembwe is a very, very interesting personality as it relates to Nyasaland history. He was brought to the United States by a missionary, and this missionary was able to arrange for him to be admitted through the National Baptist Convention to the Virginia Theological Seminary, where he studied religion, Christian religion, and later was ordained by the Baptist Church as a Baptist minister. Now, while Chilembwe was at college at Wilberforce, and he was at the Virginia Theological Seminary, but when he was there, he was heavily influenced by African American progressive thought.
Yeah.
People like Frederick Douglass, for example. Even Booker T. Washington, his whole notions of self-help and self-reliance also impacted him as well. And by 1899, he had been ordained as a Baptist minister. And then in 1900, he returned to Nyasaland. This is Chilembwe. And when he came back, having been in the United States and been subjected to racism and Jim Crow, and he had witnessed the lynchings of African Americans in the United States during the late 19th century, which was huge. I mean, thousands of people were lynched between the 1880s and the Great Depression in the United States. And the period of the 1890s was one of the worst. You had mass lynchings, public lynchings that took place. So he witnessed all of this racism and racist violence against African Americans who were descendants of African people from the continent.
Yeah.
So he, of course, became very angered by this, and when he returned to Nyasaland, he brought a lot of these ideas and experiences with him. And in 1910, by 1910. He went back to Nyasaland in 1900. By 1910, he was facing a lot of problems, personal problems, as well as political problems in Nyasaland. Uh, Deaths, illnesses due to the horrendous conditions under which Africans lived in. And after the commencement of World War One in 1914, they began to conscript Africans at a much broader level into the British Army.
Oh,
And when the Germans tried to intervene in Nyasaland, but they had also had a conflict with the British, and the Germans had a conflict as early as 1915, and Africans were sent there to fight on behalf of the British against the Germans. And then in 1915, there was clashes as well between the Germans and the British in Nyasaland. So there was a whole movement to recruit Africans from Nyasaland and other parts of the continent into the British military during World War One. And this angered not only Chilimwe, but a lot of other Africans as well. They said, this is not our war, and we should not be involved in this. So they began to organize, and they launched an armed rebellion against the British in 1915 that was largely prompted by the refusal or the inability of people to accept the fact that they had to serve in the British Army against the Germans. So this rebellion erupted, was short-lived, but it did illustrate that Africans were willing to resist British colonialism during World War One. It also indicates that there was resistance and opposition to World War One on the African continent, and that was the same situation inside the United States as well. So there's this notion that there was very little resistance to World War One. None of that, but that is not accurate. There
exactly.
was resistance not only in Europe but also in the United States as well to World War One. Even under the leadership of Woodrow Wilson, who initially said he didn't want to get involved in World War One, but I think they realized that they could make a lot of money from producing armaments for the war. And a lot of the capitalists, in fact, were opposed to the war when it first started in 1914, 1915. Even people like Henry Ford I, because they saw it as a potential area where their workforce could be destroyed
Yes.
through the war. But then, after 1916, they were convinced that, yes, they could make money off the war by producing armaments for it. So they did enter in 1917, and of course, we know the rest is history. But these are some of the variables that went into developing a national consciousness in Nyasaland. And by 1944, the Nyasaland African Congress had been formed. And this was heavily patterned on the African National Congress of South Africa. We mentioned last week about Northern Rhodesia. They also had an African Congress, as well as Southern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia, of course, becoming Zambia after 1964, and Southern Rhodesia becoming Zimbabwe after the elections and the armed struggle in 1980. So yes.
And actually, but before I ask how Malawi got its independence from the UK and whether it was peaceful
Okay.
transition or violent struggle, very quick question about the conditions of Malawians under British colonialism. So there was a lot of forced labor
Yes.
that the British inflicted on the indigenous African people, forcing them to work in horrendous conditions to when it came to the mining industry, and also when it even came to the plantation industry of whatever cash crop they were making. Now,
Forced to pay taxes too.
yes, and I wanted to ask you about that because I thought that was shocking. So Britain never ever invested in a literacy program, a healthcare program, or anything like that. They did invest in all in all this extraction economy, and in order for the mostly impoverished people who were deliberately kept underdeveloped, as Walter Rodney argues in his tour de force of a book. So in order for these mostly impoverished workers who weren't paid, the wages, that they were owed, uh, they had to pay a tax on their huts, on the huts,
Yeah,
on the traditional homes, the huts that they lived in, and basically the slave labor that they did for the British mining companies and for the other disgusting, rapacious multinational companies, if they wanted to live on their lands in these self-made huts of theirs, they were taxed, and in order to pay that tax, they had to work
yes,
for free. Can you explain that? Because this baffled me when I was doing the research. So
most definitely. Yes, people were forced to work in order to pay taxes to the British, and but that was just a ruse to justify the exploitation of African labor and their land as well. So yes, that was the whole process. You had to work in order to pay taxes to the Europeans, and people resented this. Plus, they seized the land of the African people, and of course, created all types of discriminatory laws and repressive police systems and so forth. But the education largely was controlled initially by the European mercenaries, who were missionaries. I mean, there's a
unbelievable.
link between being mercenary and a missionary, because on the one hand, the missionaries were saying that they wanted to bring Christianity to the indigenous Africans and to provide education, but it was Christian-oriented education, which in most cases promoted subservience to the colonial rule. Now, at least one missionary who influenced others, in fact, who influenced Chinamwe, was more radical, the one who took him to the United States and arranged for him to be educated at the Virginia Theological Seminary. But most of them were very much pro-colonialism and anti-African, and
Exactly.
believed sincerely that Africans were inherently inferior to Europeans.
Unbelievable. So, when Malawi got its independence from the UK, was it one of peaceful transition of power, or was it one of violent struggle?
Well, it was a combination of both. We mentioned the 1915 revolt, but then in subsequent years, there was also resistance. For example, in World War II, there were a lot of Malawians and other Africans from the region that fought on behalf of the British during World War II. The same situation in the former French colonies as well. By that time, the Germans had been defeated during World War One, and they lost all their colonies on the African continent, which contributed to the rise of fascism in both Italy, which had also, come out on the losing end in their struggle to gain control of Ethiopia and other areas, but also Germany. And Germany's defeat during World War One, of course, created the horrendous economic conditions. They had to pay reparations to other European countries, and led to the rise of the Nazi Party, and which took over in 1933 in Germany. So yes, in World War II, there were a lot of Africans that fought on behalf of the British, and this caused a lot of unrest, particularly after the war. Now, a key figure in the independence movement was a man by the name of Hastings Banda.
Uh-huh.
Now,
Yeah, yeah. I got my question prepared about him.
yeah, right. Yeah, he
so
spent decades.
don't rush to talk about his time in office yet, but do tell us
No, we'll
about
talk
his
about
role in.
his rise as a political leader. He came to the United States, some say as early as the late 1920s, seeking to get education. He went to Wilberforce, which was an historically black college. Then later attended Mahara Medical College, and he gained his medical degree from there. Later, he went to Scotland, where he got another medical certificate from the University of Edinburgh. And of course, he wound up going back to Malawi in the late 1950s and was, of course, caught up in the independence struggle that was taking place during that particular time period. Initially, he was considered a radical. He had spoken out against colonialism. He traveled around and gave speeches, denouncing British imperialism and so forth. He was arrested around 1959 and placed in prison. And the country was still suffering from unrest. Eventually, the British was able to negotiate some type of transitional process starting around 1960, and that lasted for approximately 4 years. It was a transitional process. I believe in 1961, he was elected as prime minister, but it was still under British colonial rule. And then eventually, by 1963, there was an agreement to grant independence to Nyasaland, and which was later named Malawi. But the
Perfect.
yeah,
And then that's a perfect segue to this. Now the first leader of Malawi, first president, was Hastings Banda, who, as you said, was part of the independence struggle. He did not die in office. He wasn't overthrown in a coup, which surprised me. He was voted out and then later
right.
died as a private citizen. But yes, I'm very curious. How do you assess his legacy on socioeconomics, and where was he in the Cold War? Was he more fairly neutral, but leaned more towards the U.S., Britain, and their allies, or the USSR and the communist nations? I'm curious your response. And just before you do respond, let me educate the audience. Uh, Banta's party, which is still is in existence, is the Malawi Congress Party. And here's what Wikipedia had to say about them. They are described as center right, and though Bonta did believe in some pro-state owned enterprises and pro-state ownership, his party believed strongly in anti-communism, African Malawian nationalism, conservatism, both fiscal and social conservatism, and to a degree, Ubuntu, uh, which is people are people through other people, which we will later go more deeper when we study South Africa. Uh, the party is a member of the horrendous centrist Democrat International, which is where Christian Democrat, right-leaning parties and far-right parties globally come to meet to advance a global right-leaning agenda and how they can help one another out. The party is a member of the African branch of the International Democracy Union, which is another global Unite the Right organization. Its chairperson is Stephen Harper of the Conservative Party of Canada, and the MCP is a member of its African branch, Democrat Union of Africa, and yes, and then from there. So yeah, what's your critical assessment of Hastings Bonda's socio-economic policy as well as his foreign policy?
Well, just to mention, initially, the Nyasaland African Congress was considered progressive. It was considered the vanguard of the independence struggle in Nyasaland. In fact, in 1945, while Dr. Hastings Banda was in Scotland, after he had received his medical certificate, he worked as a physician in that country. He was requested to represent Nyasaland at the Fifth Pan African Congress that was held in Manchester, England in October of 1945. So that gives you some indication. That was, up to that date, one of the most radical, probably the most radical Pan African Congress that had been held. There had been several Pan African Congresses. There was a Pan African Conference, for example, in 1900 in England. Prior to that, in 1893, there was an African Congress that was held in Chicago in conjunction with the Columbian Exposition. And then in 1919, after the conclusion of World War I, Dr. W.B. Du Bois went to Paris and organized a Pan African Congress there. And there were other Pan African Congresses that were held in 1921, 1923, 1925, and in 1927. So in 1945, the Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England, had trade unionists in addition to some traditional leaders. And they had people such as Kwame Nkrumah, George Padmore, the former Malcolm Nurse from Trinidad, Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, which was under British colonialism. So yes, these are some of the people. Marcus Garvey's first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, played a critical role in the Fifth Pan-African Congress, and that she's just starting now to get recognition for her role in the Pan-African Congress of 1945 and other Pan-African work that she was doing, and also work on behalf of women's rights during the 1930s, 40s, and so forth. So after that time period, the struggle escalated because there was a mandate issued in the concluding documents of the Fifth Pan-African Congress that called for, independence as soon as possible. And of course, after that, Nkrumah went back to the Gold Coast, and others became more militant and more involved. They were involved in general strikes and other forms of resistance, which eventually grew into armed struggles in certain territories. So yes, by the time they took office in 1964, and after that time period, they moved quickly to the right. The Malawi Congress Party maintained relations with the racist apartheid regime in South Africa. Also, the Northern Rhodesia and Southern Rhodesia, which at that time were not independent. In 1953, we talked about this last week, about the development of the convention of the people of Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland. It was a central federation of these states that were run by the British. That broke up in 1963 because the escalation of the independence struggle, and of course, Malawi was coming out of the British colonial system, and Banda, to his credit, opposed this federation with the Rhodesias and Nyasaland. But when he became an independent state during the Cold War, they were heavily anti-communist and largely sided with the West during that time period. For whatever reason, that was his position, and he maintained that position for the next 30 years that he remained in office between 1964 and 1994. So Malawi remained a heavily underdeveloped state, impoverished, but at the same time allied heavily with the United States and the other imperialist countries, including, the occupationist regime in South Africa, settler colonial regime in South Africa. So it's not a good history in that particular regard.
And I have to ask this question: Why do you think he pivoted so hard to the reactionary to the reactionary far right, and allied himself with the Anglo-American Empire, big business, and apartheid South Africa, which basically, like what Israel is in West Asia, apartheid South Africa and some of its kindred spirits in southern Rhodesia and Namibia, also a proxy to Anglo-American Canadian empire in Africa. I'm curious your response.
Well, it could be that he felt, since Malawi was heavily dependent upon migratory labor into the mines in South Africa, a lot of their people were sent there. Also, he accused other African states of being hypocrites, because he said that they were not generally democratic. And so for them to say that he didn't have a right to trade and have normalized relations with the apartheid regime in South Africa, as well as dealings with Southern Rhodesia, was that it was in the interest of the people in Malawi. In actuality, it really wasn't, because the country did not grow and did not develop. So who knows what the real reasons were for his right-wing position, but they were noted for that, that they were not providing any assistance or military or financial assistance to the liberation movements in Southern Africa. Um, Through the
Wow.
OAU, they came up with the Liberation Committee after the first year. The inaugural meeting was in 1963 in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And then the following year, the second OAU conference was held in Cairo, Egypt. And that's where they set up the Liberation Committee, which was designed to funnel resources and training into the independence movements. And the 1964 OAU summit, that was the one that was attended by Malcolm X, where he presented a 8-page memorandum to the heads of state calling for support, political support to the African American movement that was gaining a tremendous amount of mass support inside the United States. So that was shows you the contradictions that were going on. So Malawi maintained a rightward position during the 1980s, for example, when in Mozambique, after Frelimo took over in 1975. Several years later, they came up with this national resistance group, the Mozambique National Resistance, which was supported by the Rhodesians initially, and then later by the Boers, the apartheid rulers in South Africa. And it is reported, also supported the MNR for Mozambique, which was pretty outrageous. And it caused a lot of problems between Frelimo in its first phase, independence phase, under Samora Machel. And Samora Machel had serious problems with Dr. Hastings Banda, over support for the MNR, which was nothing but a proxy for the apartheid regime.
Before I talk about before we talk about all the other leaders of Malawi, I want your response on this because I've been waiting to tell this story about Hastings Banda.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
in 10th grade, I got to learn about some African history. My 10th grade history teacher was Mr. Klinger. Had a good sense of humor, that guy. And
Was this in Belgium or where?
yeah. Here in Belgium,
Okay. Wow,
and
interesting.
it was a great history class, and he told this story. So this is him recalling this story about Hastings Bonza when he was when he was a kid. He said that he once saw on television Dr. Hastings Bonza giving a press conference of sorts to the foreign press, and one of the country was already quickly becoming very, very repressive. And apparently, a foreign journalist asked him, what did you do with what have you done with all of your, opposition and also journalists who are critical of you? And apparently, Hastings Bonza said the following: "Ho ho ho! I fed them to the crocodiles." and
That could very
apparently,
well be true.
And apparently, years later, when Bond when he left office and he died of a pneumonia or whatever, uh, journalists and observers and human rights observers and so forth, all apparently gathered around, the presidential palace, and in the backyard, they saw some crocodiles who were very, very overweight.
Wow.
Your response to that about Hastings Bonza and his legacy, his atrocious human rights legacy.
Yeah, well, officially, I believe in 1970, they became a one-party state. And there was one story about him having a meeting with some people who were actually colleagues of his, comrades in his cabinet, to debate the whole question of moving towards a multi-party democratic state. And some of them did disagree with him. He thought that the country still remained a one-party state. And it was reported that these people were, in fact, tortured to death. They were disappeared. So he did not tolerate any real opposition inside of Malawi at all. And that was the situation and remained such for approximately 30 years.
Unbelievable. Let's get on to the leaders that have come under him. And actually, funnily enough, interestingly enough, apparently, yeah, no, he very very repressive man, and unlike Nkrumah, who still gets the reputation of being authoritarian. Unlike the Tanzanian socialist model, which unfortunately has gone more neoliberal since the since the death of Julius, and even the Derg in Ethiopia. So one can even criticize their human rights records and so forth, but apparently even when it comes to their socioeconomic legacy, they still left behind a much better legacy than Hastings Banda, Sani Abacha, Ali Selassie, and Mobutu put together, which says everything you need to know about far right economics and whatnot. So, so
yeah,
the next,
well,
yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the next two leaders after Banda was Bakili Mul Bakili
Maluzi.
Maluzi, and then who served in office May 24th, 1994 to May 24th, 2004, and then Bingowa Mutharika.
Mutharika, yeah.
Yes. Apologies for butchering these people's names. May 24th, 2004 to April 5th, 2012. Both of these gentlemen were part of the UDF, United Democratic Front. The party's ideology is that of liberalism. They are members of the African continent-wide branch of Liberal International, the Africa Liberal Network, and this is where various, I'd argue, center-right parties, like the Liberal Party of Canada, MR of Belgium, the VVD of the Netherlands, Fianna Fáil of Ireland, and again, various Christian Democrats and liberal parties of the Nordic countries in Eastern Europe, who are very much to the right, meet to advance economic liberalism and help one another out. And nearly all of the African and Global South members are fairly far right on fiscal matters when it comes to socioeconomics. How do you assess the legacy of these two gentlemen?
Well, just to mention first, in the early 90s, and we talked about this over the weeks, there was a whole movement demanding multi-party democracy across various regions, geopolitical regions of the African continent. This also happened in Malawi. People were shocked and surprised that in 1992, there were mass demonstrations against the Malawi Congress Party government of Dr. Hastings Banda. And as a result of that, they had to initiate some type of reforms to set up multi-party democracy and allow other political parties to participate. So the UDF, the United Democratic Front, won the elections in 1994. So therefore, Dr. Banda had to step down. Now that name, United Democratic Front, a lot of people felt that this represented a new era, a more progressive and even revolutionary era, because the United Democratic Front is the same name of the organization that came about in South Africa in 1983 that was considered a front for the African National Congress, since the ANC had been banned for 20 years. In '83, they had a large conference in South Africa where the United Democratic Front was born. Now, the UDF had a lot of banned ANC leaders, multi-generational. I mean, you had people like Oscar Mpeta and others who were in their 80s, by that time, who broke, with the banning and defied the apartheid system and came out publicly, in support of the UDF, which had adopted the Freedom Charter that had been written in 1955 in Kliptown, which the ANC to this day says that they still adhere to that as their guiding political program. But yes, in 1994, Banda did contest the elections, and he won. He failed miserably in the elections. So that's when the UDF came in, and but it turned out it really wasn't that much of a radical departure from the Malawi Congress Party and what it had become under Banda between 1964 and 1994. So there was more democratic practice inside the country. There was improved relations between Malawi and other countries in the Southern African Development Community, which was founded in 1992. Yet there was no really radical departure from the pro-Cold War, pro-imperialist, anti-communist legacy of the Malawi Congress Party.
Perfect segue to this leader now. Joyce Banda, no relations to Hastings. She was part
Right.
of the she was part of the DPP, but was expelled for not supporting the brother of a previous leader. Her party is also fairly right wing, far right, and according to Wikipedia, the ideology is conservatism and positions center right. And her party is also a member of the Democrat Union of Africa, where the African far right all meet to see how they can help one another out and advance a hideous right wing world. How do you assess her time in office, April 7th, 2012 to May 14th, 2014?
Yeah, she came into office not through elections. I believe that she inherited the position,
Okay.
and yeah, she was the first woman, head of state in Malawi, and she did have, it seems, during the period, have good relations with President Robert Mugabe, the former president, founding prime minister and president of Zimbabwe. In fact, she made a state visit to Zimbabwe during that particular time period. That was good to her credit. But then there was some other corruption allegations that surfaced during her rule. And she, of course, was not elected as president. I believe it was in 2014 when the elections took place. But yes, she was not a revolutionary leader either.
Okay. And then Peter Mutharika of the DPP,
Mm-hmm.
the Democratic Progressive Party, vaguely calls itself a big tent party, but it very much believes in liberalism and anti corruption, which is funny. How do you assess his time in office, May 31st, 2014 to June 28th, 2020?
Yeah, the same program pretty much, allowing bourgeois democratic atmosphere to prevail inside the country, but there was no real radical shift in regard to economic policy or foreign policy, for that matter, during this particular time period. So I think that Malawi has remained somewhat of a moderate African state, and that is the legacy that they have, and it continues up until this day.
Yeah, and after nearly 2 decades not in power, Hastings Banda's the Malawi Congress Party made a political comeback and was returned to power, led by and governed by Lazarus Chekwera from June 28th, 2020 to October 4th, 2025. Uh, how do you assess his socioeconomic legacy?
It's pretty much the same. I think there was some improvement in regard to the policies of the Malawi Congress Party. The repressive atmosphere was not very much in evidence during his tenure in office, but at the same time, there was no major shift to the left as it relates to domestic policy as well as international and foreign policy.
And currently, Malawi is governed by, again, Peter Mutharika. And how do you assess his comeback and his time in office so far?
Well, it's interesting that about 3 years ago at the United Nations General Assembly, President Mutharika gave an address, which was very interesting. It was very critical of colonialism and imperialism, and was quite an amazing speech. Now, whether that's going to be translated into domestic policy remains to be seen. But there seems to be a greater awareness in regard to the legacy of colonialism and the broader world imperialist system. Uh, Africans, despite the political orientation of these states, almost all of them have demanded, for example, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, which they do not have as of this date. It's quite amazing. So it's apartheid in a certain way, or discrimination in a certain way, because Africa has anywhere between 1.3 to 1.4 billion people. The populations of various states are growing rapidly. The overwhelming majority of the people on the African continent, I believe perhaps 70%, are under the age of 30. So what you see happening is the potential for a great change and transformation on the continent. Whether that's going to happen has a lot to do with the balance of forces that exist on the continent, and that would be true of Malawi as well. But you do have a young population. The economic crisis that exists there is not abating. And the fact that you have international conflicts that are taking place, for example, the war in Ukraine, the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, had, of course, a negative impact on the African continent in terms of the shipment of fertilizer and agricultural inputs. Agricultural products has been slowed down. So African leaders set out to try to negotiate. This was way back when the war first started in 2022. Macky Sall and another top African leader traveled to both Ukraine as well as Russia to try to negotiate some type of safe passage for agricultural products between Eastern Europe and the continent.
Oh, wow.
It happened for a brief period of time, but then it collapsed because the Russians said that they were upholding their end, but the Ukrainians and the Americans were not upholding their end. So yes, it's a lot that has to occur before Africa can generally and really unite as a political force. The potential is great. The resources are there. The agricultural land is there. The people are there. But it's just a question of ideology and class alignments and a lack of mobilization and organization, particularly among the workers, the youth, and the farmers.
Second to last question. You already mentioned Malawi and Russia. How is Malawi's relations with BRICS, and what's been its response to the anti-French wave in West Africa?
Well, being a former British colony, I don't think it's impacted them a lot, but they have spoken out in international forums against the legacy of colonialism and imperialism. They do demand a permanent seat on the UN Security Council for African states. They participate in the African Union annual summits that take place. So it seems to be some improvement in regard to relations with other African states, as well as meaning the African Union, as well as the Southern African Development Community, which is the regional organization that was formed. Initially, it was formed back in 1980 as the Southern African Developmental Coordinating Conference. And then in 1992, they updated it and became the Southern African Development Community. So they are active in that, and they are active in the African Union. So there seems to be some improvement, but not nearly enough as far as the masses of people who live there, who are still impacted by poverty.
Perfect segue to this final question, which is lastly, does Malawi have a strong left-wing movement in opposition, given that they've had multiple far-right to center-right governments? And again, make the case that if Malawi wanted to eradicate the nationwide extreme poverty one sees when they visit that country or any African country, the country, it is imperative, it must embrace socialism, Pan-Africanist leftism, Marxism, African socialism, and not even just Malawi, but continent-wide that needs to happen.
Yeah, there was left-wing elements involved during the democratic wave of the early 1990s. but they were not able to prevail. There was hope that the United Democratic Front would take a more left path. That did not happen at all. So it remains to be seen whether or not a left movement can emerge in Malawi that is effective enough to challenge through electoral means control of the Malawian government.
Well, here's hoping. Here's hoping
Yes,
because it's
and
either
that's for the
so
continent as a whole.
because I love that expression from I believe it was Rosa Luxemburg from Germany.
Okay.
Socialism or barbarism, and the current state of affairs, which has not improved at all immensely since colonial times,
Mm-hmm.
neo-colonial times. It's just unfathomable, and it has to be eradicated. And the only way to do that is through socialism, but also international socialism, continent-wide socialisms.
Yeah, Rosa Luxemburg is another very interesting political figure,
Oh, she is.
and
She is.
she was, of course, involved in both the German Social Democratic Party as well as the Polish party prior to World War One. She took a very strong position against European involvement in World War One. That's why she broke with the German Social Democratic Labor Party because they, of course, wound up capitulating to the bourgeoisie and did not take a firm position against the war. But she
And
represented
they've
the
only gotten
minority
worse
side.
since then.
Say what? They're
The
not better.
SPD has only gotten worse since then.
Well, yeah, and they did represent a minority faction, within the socialist movement at that time. And then, of course, they attempted to, after the Bolshevik Revolution and after the conclusion of World War One, they attempted to bring about a revolution in Germany, which failed. And the German Communist Party, of course, had a big conflict with the Social Democratic Party, and her and Karl Liebknecht were wound up in prison and then hung. And I think that had a lot to do with the inability of the German Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party to unite during the late 20s and early 30s to stave off the rise of the German Socialist Workers' Party, which was the Nazi party.
Yeah.
So this is one of the historical failures of the left to unite to stave off fascism. And of course, we've seen that repeatedly. It happened in Germany and, led to the rise of Hitler. And even today, I think there's still a problem of the incapacity of left-wing forces to unite, particularly against the rise of fascism, which we see taking place today throughout Europe. It's already happened here. I'm not saying America is a completely fascist state, but there are efforts by the Trump administration and his allies in the Republican Party to bring about a thoroughly fascistic state in the U.S. But there are cracks that are developing, which is good, and he's frustrated too with the firing of top leaders. The Attorney General yesterday, who was fired, and prior to that, Kristi Noem, who was over Homeland Security.
I know it's almost as if it's like the Apprentice TV show.
Yes, it's really amazing, and even the MAGA base now is divided over the war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, because Trump was talking all this stuff about America first. He's not going to get involved in these endless wars in West Asia and so forth. And he's doing just that right now. And they're losing, even though a lot of Iranians are being killed. They've killed a lot of their leaders. They're killing civilians. Yesterday, they bombed the Pasteur Institute, which is a major medical research facility in Iran. These are war crimes that are being committed. But at the same time, Iran now controls 25% of the flow of oil in the world because they've taken complete control of the Strait of Hormuz. They said it's not going to go back, to the old way of governance. And a lot of people, even in the West, have assessed the situation and are saying that the U.S. is losing this war. He doesn't want to lose. He doesn't like to lose. So he's going to continue to kill people in Iran, encouraging the Zionists to further their incursion into southern Lebanon. That's been happening. And then, of course, the Ansarullah in Yemen are getting involved in the resistance against U.S. imperialism and Zionism. They've been leveling some strikes at the apartheid regime in occupied Palestine. It's going to be very interesting over the next several weeks and months to see the direction of this imperialist conflict against the people of Iran alongside the Zionists. And even the NATO states are very reluctant to get involved in this. The British now are saying that they're sending people to engage in defensive operations in the West Asia region, but they do not want to commit troops on the ground or either their naval forces in an attempt to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz, particularly Harg Island. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Now, do you think that's because of however small it is? Do you think that's because of the anti-war movement, or is that just factions of the business elites, the global plutocrats who are going, look, guys, I know wars are wonderful for the arms company and we can make off like bandits with the oil, but this is actually counterproductive and it's not good for business? Do you think that's what's happening, and why Canada, Germany, Poland, the European Union, Australia, and so forth, they all condemn Iran for defending itself and for attacking U.S. military bases. But at the same time, it does seem as if they're reluctant to openly join the war, even though our good friend Richard Sanders, is saying that, Canada is helping, the U.S. again, secretly. I know for a fact Brits and so forth, they're all helping the U.S. secretly, but they do seem to be very much having a reluctant cold feet about this, and would like that this situation ends quickly and much more peacefully. And it's just hilarious to see there was some statement that the European Union was making about how people should be working from home, people should be economizing how much they use their oil, try not to drive their cars so much. And I thought to myself, okay, that's all great. They say everything except stop the bloody war.
Now, exactly. And I think it's both. I think the anti-war sentiment is strong in Britain and through other areas of the European continent, and also in the United States. They've taken polls that indicate that the overwhelming majority of people inside the U.S. are opposed to this aggressive assault on the Islamic Republic of Iran and its allies throughout West Asia. I think it's both. And I think within the capitalist class itself, there's tremendous amount of uncertainty and opposition. That's why the stock market is going down. And that's why the price of oil is going up. Now, Trump is making these statements almost every other day that the war is coming to an end. And, he's doing a lot, in terms of forcing the Iranians to back down. They want a ceasefire. And then when you hear statements from the Iranian government, whether it's the foreign ministry, the parliament, or whatever, they say, no, we're not engaged in negotiations. We do not seek a ceasefire. And we're not going to go back to the old status quo, where, you're promoting and funding and facilitating the deployment of U.S. troops in the Persian Gulf Arab monarchies. They're living well there, while the Iranians are suffering under sanctions. So now they control 25% of the flow of oil in the world. The Yemenis could easily, and which they've done before, seize the Bab al-Mandab waterway. If they do that, that means that approximately over 1/3 of the flow of oil will be controlled by the resistance forces in West Asia. This has tremendous economic implications for imperialism. So Trump says, yeah, we're going to be ending the war very soon. The stock market goes up, and then there's more attacks on the state of Israel, more attacks on the proxy regimes within the Persian Gulf. And then, of course, the stock market goes back down and the price of oil continues to go up. There are other layoffs that are taking place that they're covering up inside the United States. Thousands of people are losing their jobs, even in the manufacturing sectors of the economy, for two reasons. One is the tariffs that were imposed by the Trump administration last year, which had been an abysmal failure. And even the U.S. Supreme Court, as right-wing as it is, said that they were illegal. And a federal judge who had heard the case before said that the administration has to pay back the people in the United States who have been charged extra as a result of these tariffs. Trump is not saying a word about it. In fact, he started a war with Iran in response to that. So it's a major, major development. In Africa, countries like Malawi, for example, are being negatively impacted by the war. Higher fuel prices, the lack of agricultural inputs, and also the divisions that this has created on an international level. So, yeah, countries like Malawi, they're going to suffer immensely as a result of this war if it's not ended soon. Plus, a lot of damage has already been done. I don't see countries like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia going back, and even the Kingdom of Jordan going back to the way things were. Because those countries like in the UAE, like, for example, Dubai, they have a lot of banking transactions that take place there, US and European-based banks, commercial enterprises that exist there, and tourism and oil exploration that takes place there alongside the US military forces that are based there. So I don't see, it's going to take a long time for them to rebuild if they are ever able to rebuild. And that means that those countries are going to decline economically, which is going to hamper their capacity to interfere in places like the Republic of Sudan, for example, which the UAE is heavily involved in supporting the rapid support forces in the Republic of Sudan, is causing tremendous havoc and displacement in that very, very important Horn of Africa state.
Interesting. Also, some good news. Folks who follow the journalism of Dimitri Lascaris, who's been a frequent guest on this show, he seems to be doing okay. He is still reporting from Iran itself, and he was recently on past guest Rania Khalek's Breakthrough News program. So we hope that all continues to be well with him. Abayomi, how are your friends and colleagues at Press TV, the ones who are based in Tehran and other parts of Iran? How are they doing?
They seem to be doing good. Press TV is still broadcasting 24/7, and they're having constant 24/7 coverage of the war, and they're discussing the war with other regional partners, particularly in Lebanon and Yemen. So it's absolutely amazing that they are continuing and have been able to continue, even though this war has been going on now for approximately 5 weeks. Will be 5 weeks tomorrow.
Yes.
And they're trying to cover up the deaths that are taking place in the Zionist entity, as well as other states in the region. We know that U.S. troops have been killed in the war. They're saying only 16, but many people believe it's a lot more are being killed than that. They have admitted that several hundred U.S. soldiers have been injured, but they're not saying what the injuries are. You know, people can be injured, they could be medevaced back to the United States, and they can die here. But I guess they're not. If they die here after being wounded, they're not considered. It's not considered killed in action. And also, what are these injuries? You know, I mean, have people been blinded? Have their hearing been disabled? Do they have shrapnel in their chest? You know, in different parts of their bodies? What type of mental health problems are these people going to have after being subjected to an enforced unjust imperialist war. We know from previous wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, there are huge problems among veterans. I mean, suicide is a major, major cause of death of U.S. veterans in the United States. All kinds of mental health crises
And the
there.
homeless.
Yeah, so it's this remains to be seen. And Trump, who's attempting to impose a outright fascist state in the U.S., now wants to reconfigure the world imperialist system. Um, this is why he's attacking the allies of U.S. imperialism. Canada, for example, he said he wanted to incorporate Canada into the United States as a 51st state. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
Greenland, he wants to take it over from the control of the Kingdom of Denmark. And he's been attacking the British. These are their top allies, saying that Sir Keir Starmer is no Winston Churchill. What kind of ridiculous nonsense is that?
Exactly.
What does he mean by that? And then Hegseth, the so-called Secretary of War, saying like, well, what happened to the big bad Royal Navy? This is what he said earlier this week. That the Royal Navy should help them go and seize control of the Strait of Hormuz. Why? Why should they do that? So
I would hate to give any credit to the, I think, insincere, very selective anti-war movement of the right, the
exactly.
libertarians and the supposed anti-imperialists there. But Israel's genocide in Gaza and its continued mass murder in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, southern Lebanon, and by the way, our thoughts and prayers with anyone who is a colleague, friend, or family member of Rania Masri, Rania Khalek, Dr. Mara Osman, and Julia Chassem. Three of those women based in Lebanon, and I know still have a lot of family members in Lebanon, so we hope all is well with them, because there are still attacks, spontaneous attacks that happen in Beirut and other parts of the country. But going back to the supposed anti-war movement of the right, the far right,
Yeah.
in the U.S. I would hate to give credit to them, but there has been a lot of far right folks disgusted by Israel's actions
Yeah.
In historic Palestine. When Tucker Carlson was interviewing a prominent Palestinian Christian and was being and was was being taught that historic Palestine has some of the oldest Christian communities in the world, you now see some of these far right folks really starting to reconfigure and starting to unlearn all of the racist ideology they've indoctrinated themselves about. Whoa, wait a minute. Why are we us who consider ourselves far right Christians, why are we eradicating the oldest Christian communities on the planet? Because you also have the Armenian Christian community, Greek Christian communities, Lebanese Christian communities in historic Palestine,
Russian, yeah.
all being genocided by Israel. So do you think that, and maybe we do underestimate the Ron Pauls of the world, the Pat Buchanans of the world, and their anti-war, but their pro-Trump advocacies on the socioeconomics front? Do you think that's what's happening, and why we are seeing polls that show that while the corporate media is cheerleading on this war, and while there's all these astroturf, well-funded pro-Iranian war diaspora folks, there does seem to be, amongst many people who watch the Ron Pauls of the world, who read anti-war, who watch Tucker Carlson, they all seem to be very much mobilizing and saying, no war in our name, no war for oil, leave Iran alone. In fact, even leave Venezuela alone, even if we hate that communist hellhole regime.
Yes, because the economic situation in the United States is worsening. The higher fuel prices, food prices, prices for mortgages and rents are accelerating. And as I mentioned before, the loss of jobs, a lot of small businesses are shutting down, and that's been happening even last year. and it's credited to the tariffs that were imposed by Trump. But now with the oil prices accelerating, even more people are being impacted. Plus, this shift on the part of the Trump administration, uh, eliminating tax subsidies for electronic vehicle production. Now they're mandating a return to internal combustion engines. I mean, it's insane. So when that happens, that means you have to lay off people, you have to retool in regard to shifting back to the internal combustion engine automotive production. You know, this is totally irrational, even from a capitalist perspective.
I was just about to
You
say
know,
it from a
it doesn't
libertarian
make sense.
perspective. I mean, they don't believe in taxes, tariffs, or anything like that. So what Trump is doing, even if they would like to rebuild manufacturing, this is just completely antithesis of their free market ideology.
Exactly, exactly. So Malawi is going to be impacted. The entire SADC region, Southern African Development Community region, is being negatively impacted. Malawi has a population of approximately 22 million people. A lot of the people are impoverished, so they're going to suffer as a result of these decisions that are being made, particularly by the United States, which is the leading imperialist country. They've even floated the idea repeatedly in the last few weeks that the U.S. may pull out of NATO, that the U.S. really doesn't need NATO, that the other NATO partners are not assisting the United States in this war, which they were not even informed about and even consulted about, that they're supposed to go along and send their forces in to bomb Iran and also to send in ground troops in an effort that could be disastrous, a military attempt to retake the Strait of Hormuz, or perhaps the Bab el Mandab waterway that is further to the east around Yemen. So, yes, this is a major development. I think the Trump administration is digging a deeper hole for itself, but not just for itself as a political entity, but this is worsening and weakening the world capitalist system as a whole. And he even had, because of the oil prices escalating, Trump had to lift sanctions on Russian oil. Can you believe it? And also on Iranian oil to try to maintain lower prices for fuel. So it's too many contradictions for this to be able to be a successful military operation. Plus,
Uh,
he has elections coming up later this year, and they've already issued an executive order to restrict mail-in ballots. So it's pretty wild.
wow,
Yeah. So I
unbelievable.
guess they're going to put ICE agents at the polling booths. They already have ICE agents at the airports because the Transportation and Security Administration agents were not being paid. I understand they are starting to get paid now. So perhaps they'll withdraw ICE. I don't know. Who knows? But it's
Wow.
a lot of chaos that's going on here. But it's not benefiting the capitalist system in the United States or around the world with the divisions that are going on and also with the economic crises that is developing. So Africa has to come together as a whole and move in a different direction, you know, closer to the East and closer to themselves.
Definitely couldn't agree with you more. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our All Things Africa edition, learning about Malawi with Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Abayomi, as everyone should know by now, longtime historian, journalist, Pan Africanist, leftist activist. And again, just before we go, a reminder to our audience to again share One Plus One widely, help us overcome the far right algorithms by sharing us widely. And please donate to our PayPal. People are having trouble. Get in touch with me at yurismatter@gmail.com. Sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share. So again, very important that people share widely. And just another urgent reminder, folks, please, if you can, become a paid Patreon to my friend Chris Richards. Chris hosts The Eclectic Radical. I'm a frequent guest, and sometimes I co-host on the show, and he's been on the show 3 times now. Recently lost his job. He takes care of his wife who struggles with diabetes. So And of course, everyone who knows how scary it is when you lose your job in America, do become a Patreon to Chris, because you're also helping me immensely, and hopefully we can do some more journalism projects outside of our home if we do that. And if you're and again, you guys can give up one of those overpriced streaming services. YouTube has all the free music, so y'all can give up on the Spotify. Anywho, folks, have a great weekend. The next country Abayomi and myself will be exploring is Mozambique. Do join us then for that. Have a great weekend, folks. All my best. And until then, good night and good luck.